G'day friends and welcome to another one of my videos. Today we'll be finishing off stitching that panorama that we took in Sydney Harbour. I'm going to take you through stitching it in Lightroom and also stitching it in Photoshop. So if you want to learn how to do that, well then stick around. And welcome back. Now I'm here set up in front of my computer in the man cave, and what we're going to do is we're going to go through first of all the Lightroom method of actually stitching these pictures together, and then secondly we're going to talk about what are the advantages that Photoshop brings to the table. And but first of all, let's have a look at my desktop, because I've managed to save all my pictures in this folder here. So I've got the JPEG versions and I have the RAW versions. Yes, I shoot in RAW too. Great little feature that the M50 does, so it's always good. So obviously from a JPEG perspective, you really can't get so much out of those pictures the way they're shot. It's usually the way they're stuck. But for panos, if we can do RAW, it's even better, because what we find is that sometimes the lighting conditions tend to be a little bit tricky when you're doing wide shots like this. And so the RAW helps you edit them. But that's enough of that talk. Let's see what we can do inside of Lightroom. Okay, so I'm going to fire up Lightroom. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import these pictures. So I will navigate to my desktop to the RAW folder, and I am going to select everything except my experimental panoramas, and I'm going to import them. So now you'll see is that we've got 6 individual shots. They all start from right to left, and they all have, different look and feels to them because they were taken with different light conditions, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to correct that, and Lightroom does a real easy job of it. All you have to do is select the very first picture, and we're going to head over to the develop area, and just so you can see what's happening. So the very first picture in the sequence, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hit the auto button. I'm going to cheat. I'm not an expert. There you go, got auto. And then the color, what kind of color? So I'm going to use the preset, which is the Adobe landscape. And there you go, boom, those punchy blues, they look fantastic. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to copy those settings into the other pictures. And it's pretty easy. What I need to do now is do a shift click and select all the pictures. And I'm just going to hit the sync button, which is on the bottom right hand corner, right? So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to hit synchronize. And then what it does, it copies those colors and all those settings into the different pictures. And so if you have a look, there you go. And you've got a good feel for what they're like. Okay, so now that we've got the color and sort of the look and feel of the panorama kind of all set, then we're ready to move on to the next stage of this. But I want to touch on 2 things. First of all, when we took the pictures on site, what I talked about was getting that overlap, and it's really important because the stitching happens with AI. Obviously, the AI in Lightroom and Photoshop is what makes this happen. So the more help that you give it, the better. And let me just touch on something, because I discovered this as I was doing the practice runs. Now have a look at this first one here. We've got this building called Gresham, right? And that's all the way down there. And then on the second photo, there's Gresham again, right? So we've got that overlap in order for the actual photo to be stitched correctly. Now let's do another example. Now look at this other photo here, which is the second last from the right. We've got a lot of water. We've got a bit of headland, sky, right? Now, as much as I would love for this program to be able to do the right thing, it's going to struggle. And the reason why is because here, where the AI is trying to stitch, doesn't have much to go on. And if I look at the next photo in the sequence, um, so obviously it's just a bit of headland that he has to relate to. So it's going to have problems. But anyway, we'll see the results in a second. So I'm going to select all these pictures again. I'm going to right click on them and I'm going to hit the photo merge. Now, the photo merge has three different options: HDR, panorama, and HDR panorama. Now, we did not take HDR photos, which is not only just a sequence of different locations, but a sequence of different lighting conditions. So I am going to select Control M or panorama and let Lightroom do its thing. So now it's on its way. It's actually doing its thing. In Lightroom is really easy and it's actually done already. So if you have a look now, this is what we ended up with. Is a fantastic looking, let's say, view of the panorama. Now, it's kind of perfect. It still has a little bit work to do, but obviously it stitches really well. Now, the point I was trying to make with the last picture, notice here, it almost clipped the end, so that's that ferry that we saw, and that's the headland, but there's no more. So it actually failed to stitch the last picture, and that's because there wasn't enough references in order for the two pictures to come together. So what Lightroom has decided to do is say, hey, no, sorry, can't do it, and it just drops it. Fair enough. I mean, it can only try its best, right? So if you have a look here, it's also got an auto crop. So it's taken away all the bits of the photo that were outside the shot, creates it, and then we can merge it. Now, this is really quick. It'll do its job in probably a minute or so. But one of the things that I wanted to touch upon, not just in regards to the overlap, but it was the fact that I actually took the pictures in portrait mode. Now, the reason we take the pictures in portrait mode is in order for there to be more quality in those images as far as pixels are concerned. So if you have a look at these portrait pictures, you've got the full portrait pixels, and then as far as width is concerned, you've got all the other sort of information because you've taken them all in the same way. So it's still doing its thing. So for better shots, for more quality, bigger portraits, make sure the photos are make sure the photos are taken in portrait mode instead of landscape mode, and you'll find that you'll get higher quality photos. Okay, so here it is. It's done. So down here, I've got a raw version of my pano, and doesn't that look fantastic? It's beautiful. So what I'm going to do though, I need to correct a few things because horizontally, I don't think it's as horizontal as I would like it. So it's just a matter of scrolling down on the side here into transform. And I'm just going to hit the auto button. I mean, this is the beauty of Lightroom. You don't have to be an expert to know how to use this stuff. And there you go. It's done that. Now, it's done a little bit of thing. So if you have a look here at these buildings, they look like the Leaning Towers of Sydney. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of correction, and it's really easy to do. Have a look here where it says guided in the transform area. You click on guided, and what it does, it brings up this zoom thing, right? So what I want to do is I'm going to select two buildings in order to tell the program how it should straighten itself up practically. So I'm going to pick this building here. That's pretty big and ominous. And I'm going to get as close as I can to that corner. Now, I wish I had a mouse mat because it would do the job so much easier. But I'm going to pick it. I'm going to pick it right there. Oh my God, help me. Anyway, there we go. So I got one, and then I'm going to make a line that follows that building as best as possible. Now, so what I'm going to do is I need to stick to that gray area there. And as long as I get close enough, Just remember, this is extremely zoomed in. So I'm going to do on the inside instead of the outside and let it go. That's one. And then I'm going to choose this other building. And I'm going to do it right in the corner as well, as best as possible. And then I'm going to, so it's click and maintain click. And then just follow it to the base of the building and then let it go. So what it does, it straightens that skyline for you and it looks beautiful. So that's great. I'm really proud of that. Obviously, I didn't do much. I just clicked on some buttons and it's done. Now, what this also allows you to do, obviously, if you think that this is too big, so notice on the bottom left corner, we've got a little bit of that forecourt. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just clip that out. And then I think maybe it's a bit too wide, too many plants and trees. I'm going to leave a little bit there, but not do too much. And then I'm kind of content with that. I can also do a little bit of a, like tip it around like that if I really want to play around with that. But then I'm going to have to just clip it a little bit more. I want to make sure that fairy's there. It's actually a good little feature. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it over and I'm going to go done. And I'm done. My panorama is finished. And that's great. So now I can just very easily hit file and export. And I'm going to call it Sydney Pano Extreme. I don't know, that sounds cool. And then it's done. Okay, so that's the Lightroom. Very easy. Now, I guess the simplicity in this was that the pictures were taken right in the beginning. If we unfortunately made mistakes with the location and the lighting, then obviously it would have been tougher to sort of put together in post-production. And that's always like the challenge. So if you get the photos right on location, this job is so much easier afterwards. All right, so let's get back. I'm just going to very quickly touch upon Photoshop. Now, what Photoshop is for is practically doing the same thing, but with more details. Now, imagine there was some, I don't know, funky elements like in this picture that you weren't too happy with, and you wanted to correct them in Photoshop, and you're a bit of a guru, like I'm not, but, obviously I know how to fix some things. And so I'm going to select the pictures again. I'm not going to include the pano, just the pictures. And I'm going to do a right click, and then I'm going to hit instead of hitting photo merge, I'm going to click on edit in, and then we have merge to panorama in Photoshop. All right. So I'm going to hit the click, and what that's going to do, it's going to launch Photoshop, and it's going to pop up with this window that says it's called photo merge. It's detected that they're in a sequence, and then it's asking me what type of merging do you want to do. Now, I leave it at auto. Obviously, if I knew exactly what photo, if it was spherical or whatever, then I would choose the right one. But auto is fine. It knows what to do. So now it's got the listing of all the files, and then I can hit OK. Now, what it does, it goes off and uses its own AI to stitch these photos together. And it's a little bit more, let's say, advanced, because it goes into each photo and detects, the actual details, and then puts them together in different layers. Like I said, it is the pro version of stitching. So if you don't have a lot of skills in this particular program, you may have to teach yourself some of that. Now, what it's doing, it's putting the layers together now, and it's doing the best it can, and then we'll see what happens. And then it does it. Now, you're going to notice something very different with this particular one. What you're going to notice is that it's going to not drop that last image. Remember the last image that we talked about, which was wasn't enough reference points to actually stitch together? Well, what Photoshop does, it says, okay, I couldn't find a match. But what he does, it just doesn't drop it. It actually plants it on the screen. It looks a bit funky, but you'll see what I mean. And voila, there it is. So like I was saying, see the last picture? That's that picture that he didn't know how to actually stitch because there wasn't enough reference points. So, you know, what can you do? So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to sort of flatten the image so I can edit it and get rid of this, the excess. So it's pretty easy. Okay, so now I've got one image. Then I'm going to select, sorry guys, let me go back to Photoshop, put on full screen. No, that's Lightroom full screen. I want Photoshop in full screen. There we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to crop it, right? Crop the heck out of it. And then I'm going to just sort of do it up to there. Edit, image, crop. Boom, it's done. Now, same exercise, obviously, it looks a little bit different because Photoshop it's just so much more powerful when it comes to other things. But you would have to go through the same exercise in this, which is to obviously fix up those buildings because they're looking a bit funky as well. But that would be, imagine you would want to erase that boat. You know, that's why you would sort of do it in Photoshop, or if you wanted to sort of add clouds or do something more artistic with it, you would bring it on. But obviously, I was pretty content with the product or what came out of Lightroom. So if we go back to our desktop, you notice that this is good enough. I mean, I'm pretty happy. Maybe I can play with the lighting, bring up some of the, you know, so it's not so dark, but, you know, I'm happy. So that was it. So that's the Lightroom method, and that is the Photoshop method. I don't really need to go into more detail because I think that's once the photos are shot right, it is done well. Now, just one more note. I did mention that I was going to briefly talk about the actual photos in 360. Now, what I've done is I've taken 360 photos. Now, these are very, very extensive. What I mean by that is that if you're trying to do a 360 spherical photo, that means that it's not just panorama. It's panorama as well as the up and the down, practically 360, right? And that means that you have to take those pictures on that level, and then you have to take the pictures on the high level and the pictures on the low level of the panorama. Now, Lightroom can do it to a certain degree, but that is more of like an advanced version of it if you wanted to do it that way. But there's no reason why you couldn't stitch a 360 pano as well. So we're not going to do that because I think that's a tutorial all on its own. And I got a link to show you how to do that from drone images, which is sort of the same or similar type of situation. But if you want to see how to stitch end-to-end a 360 pano, let me know and I'll do a separate video. But if obviously you don't care, well, you know, I won't. Yeah, so that's it. Hopefully that was clear and concise. Hopefully it didn't waffle too much. But that's part 2 of stitching those panorama pictures together. And there you have it, friends, stitching a panorama using Lightroom and Photoshop. Now, I have more respect for those OG panoramas that were taken with SLRs, where someone in an actual dark room had to stitch those pictures together. You know, I'm glad we don't have to do it that way anymore. But that's it. That's the video. Hope you got something out of it. If you liked it, give me a like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And until the next time, ciao for now.